Good day, everyone. It's Alan Schimmel, and welcome to another DevOps.com webinar. I'm not sure if you're getting any reverb here, but hopefully it'll go away. Today's webinar is Bridging the Gap Between Dev and Ops, and it's brought to us by our friends at Electric Cloud. Okay, sounds like quality's fine out there. Okay. Our panelists today, actually, before we do panelists, folks, reverb is there. It is a reverb. Hold on, I don't know why it's just good. Mute everything on this side, please. Mute it. Hello. Okay, that'll take care of that. All right. Sorry for the little audio mix-up, everyone. This is Alan Schimmel, and welcome to our webinar. Before I introduce our all-star panel, though, let me just take a quick moment and go through our GoToWebinar control panel. We have set aside time for questions today. Our first thing about questions is that we use the question section of our GoToWebinar control panel. So if you look, and for most of you, it'll be in your upper right-hand corner, you'll see a section marked questions, and if you click the little caret or arrow to make it downward facing, you will see it expands, and you'll see as a couple of folks have already asked questions, and you can put it in there and we can take care of it. The nice thing about putting your questions in here, folks, is that they are queued. You don't have to worry about forgetting them. If you're like me, we will have, everyone is, yes, loud and clear from India. Thank you. It's the best place to put in your questions. Don't wait till the end of the webinar because we have over 2,000 something people registered for today. And if there's a rush at the end with people with questions, there's no way we can get to them all. The nice thing about putting them in here too is also we have a written record of them. And if Gene and Anders, our presenters, cannot get to them today, at least we'll have a record and we could try to get back to you later with that. If you are having technical issues, maybe the slides aren't progressing or the audio is reverbing as it was earlier, please put them into our chat section and we can go on there and take care of it there. Next, let me introduce our panel. So it's only two people on today's panel, but both of these gentlemen are rock stars in their own way in the DevOps world. Let me first introduce someone who really needs no introduction. I kind of feel like David Letterman on that new Netflix show he has. He's a friend of mine. He actually is the reason I'm involved in DevOps to begin with. Author of both the Phoenix Project, the DevOps Handbook, and co-author, as well as several other books. Researcher, is an advisor to Electric Cloud as well, Gene Kim. Gene, welcome to DevOps.com webinars.
Hey, thank you so much, Alan. Always good to be on.
Yep. And then joining Gene is a regular guest from Electric Cloud with us. He's the CTO and one of the really knowledgeable people out in the DevOps space, Anders Wallgren. Anders, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. You're too kind.
No, I'm not. But anyway, gentlemen, you have a lot to talk about today. Today's webinar is on Dev and Ops and the kind of the friction, if you will, and the push and pull of it. We're going to let you take it from here, though I don't want to take up much more time. So with that being said, Anders, take it away.
Happy to. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, this afternoon or morning or evening, depending on where you are. We're going to talk today about Dev and Ops and how to bridge the gap between the two. And as we have known now for many, many years, based on Mark Andreessen's kind of famous quote, software is eating the world. And that's really, across all different categories of companies. There really are very few companies these days that are not in some way dependent on or producing software as part of their business model. And so it's just become a very integral part of how most companies do business, and you know, we're not as good at it yet as we can be and should be, and that's, you know, part of the topic for today. But a little bit of, you know, kind of background around this. This is a chart from visualcapitalist.com, but it's kind of an interesting look at how market capitalization has changed kind of over the years, especially as software has started dominating. And, you know, as we can see here, this is just, you know, basically the 5 largest companies on the market by market capitalization over the years. You know, here starting in 2001, when really the only software company on there was Microsoft, to now, or well, 2016 anyway. And I would bet that it's not very different looking today. All the top 5 by market capitalization companies on the markets are all software companies. You know, the logos and names here are familiar to all of us, I'm sure. And that's really, you know, that's really a sign of how things have changed, and you know, where the role of software has become so dominant in what we do day to day in these software businesses. And really, you know, kind of the question has become over the years is, you know, are we all pulling in the same direction? And especially when we talk about, you know, developers and operations, there are some, you know, just sort of natural tensions, I would say, in terms of, you know, what we're trying to do as developers and what we're trying to do as ops people. And on the dev side, it's, you know, it's create, right? It's, you know, new technologies, new features, experiment, move fast, change the tooling as new tools come available and are easier and better to use. You know, keep refactoring, simplify, innovate, you know, all of those things. And, you know, kind of the motto for dev is, you know, change is the status quo. Because we need, you know, we got to do more releases, we got to do more features, we got to do all this stuff. Whereas, you know, on the ops side, it's maintain, right? The goal is very much to keep the lights on and keep the money flowing in, you know, and kind of be the, you know, the engine for the company. And so they're really the, you know, the you know, somewhat silly quote that I'm putting on there is, you know, the status quo is the status quo, right? Because here what we're trying to do is, you know, we're trying to manage change, do it safely, make everything work together, make it repeatable, make sure that we've got approvals for everything we're doing, make sure that our service level agreements are being met, that standards are being enforced where they need to be, you know, if we're in a regulated industry, finance, healthcare, aerospace, those kinds of things. And at the same time, you know, make sure that it scales and is secure and performs the way we want to. And really, you know, kind of in some ways, the way that this kind of tension has been created is that over the years, development organizations specifically, and, you know, especially as they started using, you know, agile and Kanban and lean methodologies have become much more productive. And in the early days of agile, that actually started to create, you know, a little bit of tension, because the throughput of dev was starting to kind of pile up a little bit in terms of being able to get into production, get into you know, to the point where customers can see and use the functionality and get value from it. And, you know, hopefully you can see the little video in the background here from one of my favorite I Love Lucy episodes, where the chocolates are coming out faster than they're able to actually package them up. So they have to, you know, resort to all kinds of shenanigans to make things work, which honestly is kind of the position that we put a lot of the ops community in as we got a little bit faster and more productive on the development side. You know, those of us in the ops community, I'm sure, are kind of familiar with that. So DevOps in a way came around as a, you know, as a response to this in some ways, right? But the idea, you know, overall is in terms of kind of the quote, what is DevOps question, right? It's really a set of practices, and it's, you know, it incorporates all kinds of and borrows from all kinds of other practices, lean, agile, Kanban, you know, all of these things that I've mentioned earlier as well, and just other concepts in order for us to get better at improving software delivery capabilities. And there's really a bunch of kind of things that we care about that are important and have shown themselves to be very important in things like the State of DevOps report over the years, in terms of how we work better together. So having shared goals and working together to deliver value, and understanding that, you know, yes, we definitely have different day-to-day kind of activities, you know, between development and ops. You know, we're writing new code in dev, and we're trying to deploy that code in ops. But really the overarching, you know, goal for everybody in the company is to provide value to our customers. And then, in return for that value, get, money or respect or fame or, whatever it is that we're looking for as a result of that. And having, knowing and understanding that there is this shared goal of what we're trying to do here, and that we aren't, sort of safely siloed in our own organizations and don't have to care at all about what comes before, what comes after, is a very strong belief in the DevOps community, as well as shared visibility. In order for all of these different stakeholders and organizations to come together and smoothly and efficiently and repeatably interoperate and deliver value to our customers, that involves everyone. It is a development problem. It's a quality challenge. It's a challenge and work for ops. All the lines of business have to participate. Even HR, finance, and partners and so on have to get involved in this. Oftentimes we're building only a piece of the application, and we're relying on partners to provide some of the functionality. And then shared control as well. No one organization, no one person is really ultimately in control of this. This is a job that all of us have to produce and qualify and release quality software that our customers derive value from. And it's really not something where any one organization can say, oh, we own this. This is our problem. There are lots and lots of different aspects to the problem. And then as we're getting a little bit more mature, and especially in larger organizations, we're starting to rely on things like shared services, right? And shared services both inside the organization as well as outside the organization. And here, we're talking about, they could be microservices, they could be things that come and go very quickly, like functions as a service or the Lambda type services. But the idea basically being, there are a lot of services that have to come together, and sometimes literally in the case of things like containers and microservices and so on, and sometimes a little bit more abstract, but all of these things have to work together, and we have to have visibility into all of those things.
Hey, Anders, one of those slides I had sent you is about the functional orientation. Could we just touch on that real briefly, just because I think it's a very concrete.
Let me do this. So we can
wonderful slide sorter.
There we go.
Oh, super. Thank you. Yeah, in fact, one of the things that we had a team had created at the DevOps and within the DevOps enterprise community was a white paper on just how organizations are responding to this. And I thought one of the things they created that was so interesting was they expanded something that we had written about in the DevOps handbook, and they actually wrote in much more detail, the 4 archetypes of how we typically organize anything in large organizations, not just technology. And they said model 1 was the traditional functional orientation. And so in our world, that would be you have all the devs together in one place, all the QA people together in another place, all the operations people in another place. And so typically we do that when we want to optimize for cost. And that is as relevant for technology organizations as it is for airlines and so forth. We also do that when we want to optimize for ensuring that we have deep domain expertise. And so that's why we put all the server administrators together and all the network engineers together, because we want to concentrate that expertise within that silo. But I think what we're often seeing is really the shift to model 3, product orientation or cross-functional organization. So beyond technology, we typically do this when we want to optimize for quickly delivering value to customers. So that means that any group can independently deliver value to customers because they have all disciplines within their teams. They don't need to beg, borrow, steal resources to do things that customers demand. They have the capability within their teams. I think so much of what Anders is talking about is by pulling people out of the silos, they have genuinely shared goals. And we don't need to have necessarily product teams to do this. Many organizations do this through matrixing, so that yes, you hang out in your guild, your QA guild, but you're actually assigned into a development feature team, maybe embedded within a line of business. And so that the idea is that you can get almost all the benefits of model 3 without having to reorg everybody. So I just think this is a marvelous treatment, and that's one of which is actually there's 4 years of guidance now that's been created by the DevOps enterprise community, really addressing the biggest problems that they see facing adoption in large complex organizations. Does that resonate with you, Anders?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's interesting, and we'll literally see a slide here in a second on it. But you know, we've worked with a lot of customers over the years at Electric Cloud, and sort of without fail, the smoothest rollouts and the fastest, you know, kind of highest velocity projects that we've run with our customers tend to be the ones where all the right people are at the table, and I mean that both kind of metaphorically and literally. You know, that you know, you know, your network person is within, you know, within ear shouting distance, you know, and your security person or firewall person is within shouting, and the communication, because the communication and visibility and so on becomes incredibly important to be successful at this. And if you have, you know, time zones or walls, whether they be physical or again metaphorical, you know, that hampers and causes friction in the communication. And you know, of course we can, you know, we can help with that. There's lots of technology out there that will help with those, and obviously we can't all sit in the same room at the same time always. But you know, where that's been done, it's always been much quicker to get things done. So we've definitely seen the you know, seen the benefit of that up front and close, I would say.
Yeah, Anders, just one last remark on that. I'm working on a project right now, a writing project that's not quite ready to announce what it is yet, but it's been really fun to sort of actually go through the life of a person who is entirely dependent on other people to get their work done. All you're doing is opening up tickets with other people, and it's not the most important thing on their list. And all, you know, they spend all the time waiting. And then even when you're in a development team, you know, you work on your feature, but then you have to open up a ticket with someone else for them to test it, and you spend again time waiting. And even when you're in the testing period, right, you're often working in a different ticketing system to do the planning, coordination, and do deployments. You have to open up tickets with another team, and it's just this Kafka-esque feeling that drains all the joy out of work.
It's so true. I mean, I think ticketing systems are evil. You know, I mean, I think they're really just very expensive Post-it notes. Now, yes, you can have workflow and accountability, and you know, obviously, I'm not, you know, I'm stating it a little bit hyperbolically to make the point, but yeah, I mean, it's the wait states that you get stuck in, and kind of, you know, the lack of visibility and the lack of coordination and all of those things that are just they get so painful and introduce so much delay.
It's funny. It's hard to feel like you're all part of the same team when all your interactions are through that ticketing system. I mean, it's just it's something that has been brought back to life for me in a very vivid way.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, that's such a narrow pipe to have a relationship with another person through, you know, professionally, and it's just, you know, a narrow window that you get to peer through, and you have no idea what the, you know, you have no idea what the priorities are on the other side of that view, you know, and it just, you know, and that leads to mistakes, and that leads to misunderstandings and miscommunications and all of those kinds of not fun things.
Exactly.
Keep the joy out of, you know, out of what ought to be kind of a fun thing to work on, I think.
Right.
You know, at least, you know, traditionally has been for the most part in my career, for sure. So.
And on just and then please, I'll stop interrupting you. But I mean, it is my big learning here is that it doesn't really matter where you are in the ticketing system. It's just whether you are the producer of tickets, the consumer of tickets, of the doer of the tickets. When you're trapped in this Byzantine labyrinth, it is you know, it is sometimes a very joyless activity.
I mean, you know, you are forced to conform to the tool, not the other way around, and that's, you know, that's always kind of painful. And please don't think of it as interruptions. You're adding value to the value stream. Speaking of which, so kind of, you know, number one on this list, at least in terms of things to think about when you're trying to bridge the gap between dev and ops, or for that matter, between any two organizations that are involved in this, right? Is this notion of a value stream and making sure that everybody understands kind of what that is. And you know, when we talk about value stream mappings, these are very hands-on, and these are a couple of pictures from a presentation that Quicken Loans did, I think a couple of years ago at the DevOps Enterprise Summit, on one of their value stream mapping activities. And you can see here in the pictures, this is full of, you know, whiteboards or white papers on the wall, and Post-it notes everywhere, and different colors mean different things. And it really is. And actually, the way I explain value stream mapping, which I have to admit is very chronologically and culturally narrow, because only people who grew up in the US, like in the 70s and 80s, would get this reference. But there used to be a really interesting kind of educational cartoon on during Saturday mornings in the US called Schoolhouse Rock. And it just take on lots of different things. But there was one particular episode that I've always loved, which was How a Bill Becomes a Law. And to me, it is a value stream mapping of the constitutional system in the United States of how a bill, which is then personified in the cartoon, obviously, and so on, all the steps it has to go through to become a law. And it's always been to me just that's how I think of value stream mapping, right? It's kind of a point of view of the code as you go through. And as Nicole Forsgren said in a webinar we did together a few months ago, we think way too much about what we do to our code and not enough about what happens to our code. And value stream mapping helps you figure out, what are we doing? How much of this is productive work and how much of this is just wait states where, there's 3 hours of work being applied here, but it's 3 days of duration. And can we make that not be 3 days and kind of take the wait states out of the system. And really, I think part of the reason value stream mapping is so valuable and so useful is, get all the collaborators and all the stakeholders literally in the room and walk through from if not earlier, but walk through, especially from when code gets checked in to, okay, how does it make it into production? How do our customers get to it? And what are all the things that we have to do, that we should do, that we aren't doing, and literally kind of hour by hour, minute by minute, go through, the life of that one line of code as it makes it from the developer's laptop out into production. And these are just, no pun intended, incredibly valuable experiences. And you really get all the people in the room and start to understand and start to get shared knowledge, shared values, shared perspectives on, okay, yes, I understand that it only takes 15 minutes to do this, but here's why you don't get it for 2 days. And sometimes that's a good reason, sometimes that's not so good a reason. But now we can have that discussion out in the open and start to kind of talk about those kinds of things. So for me, lots of aha moments when customers do value stream mappings. We have a customer in Northern Ireland. I got to go to Northern Ireland last year for the first time, and they had just done a value stream mapping in the same conference room that we were having our meeting in. And so it was just chock full of basically the beginning to end value stream. And at the end, they had sort of summarized the total active time, spent working versus kind of wait states. And it was almost, it was like a 5-to-1 ratio. It was a few days of work and a few weeks of elapsed time. And so they were obviously, looking at ways that they can collapse that, that wasted time essentially.
Yeah, 5-to-1 is actually pretty good. Usually, right? I mean, 15 minutes touch time for weeks of actual cycle time.
Yep.
And just one observation. I mean, it is interesting. I did this project with John Willis, Beyond the Phoenix Project, and it is one of the things I learned was just how value stream mapping shows up in almost all of the sort of canonical, seminal sort of rediscoveries of continuous delivery and so forth. I mean, it showed up in the Phoenix Project, and when Jez Humble was reviewing it, he said, it's actually through a value stream mapping exercise that led to the seminal IEEE paper on continuous delivery with Jez Humble, Dan North, Chris Reed. It is amazing to see that how critical a tool value stream mapping has been in this community.
Yeah, and I think the question I get all the time, whether it's from kind of one-on-one with customers or if I'm giving a talk or someone, but almost always one of the first questions is, where do we begin? And my answer is always, if you have a desired end state, if you kind of know, you want to go to Chicago, right? But you don't know where you are today, you're going to have a hard time getting to Chicago unless you can tell the mapping tool where you are. And so for me, in some ways, value stream mapping is really just discovering how you do things today and discovering it as an organization, not as a set of individuals, individually, and getting some, getting a lot of shared vision on how that stuff works. And I think that's just incredibly important. I always advise people to at least do, maybe you don't have to do the full on get 40 people in the room kind of thing at first. You might want to become a little bit more proficient at value stream mapping, or maybe even, take some classes or get some education on it, those kinds of things. But, at heart, they're fairly simple things to do. You just have to, get the people in the room and start discovering what it is that you actually do day to day. And then lots of aha moments when that happens, obviously. And really, kind of switching the pace a little bit. We talk also a lot in DevOps about, pipelines, release pipelines, software pipelines, continuous integration, continuous testing pipelines, so on and so forth. And really, I think the conclusion we've come to over the years is that really what a pipeline is the executable outcome of a value stream. And the more that you understand your value stream, the more benefit you're going to get out of the tools that are out there in the world that let you do, release automation, release orchestration, DevOps automation, all of those kinds of things. Because they're not, no tool is necessarily going to help you discover what it is that you actually do. That's something that you kind of have to do, for yourself. And as the second bullet point here says, tribal knowledge becomes documented and actionable. And no tool in the world is ever going to extract tribal knowledge, at least not today. Maybe the AIs of the future will interrogate us, properly to make that happen. But
Charity.
Yeah. And that whole, the whole notion too of wait states and why things take long, a funny, well, maybe not funny, in some ways kind of a tragic example, but one of our customers, a large pharmaceutical company, in the days before virtualization, their service level agreement for acquiring hardware and getting it installed and up and running so that you could put your new application on it was 6 weeks from the time that you requested it to the time that it was turned on and waiting for you to do your thing to it. They did a big transformation and went virtual. So this was quite a number of years ago, probably 6-7 years ago, and went virtual. And at that point, their service level agreement for acquiring a virtual machine from the time you requested it to when you got it and it was ready was 6 weeks. Because that was what they always used to do, and that was the service level agreement, and why change? Even though clearly it doesn't take 6 weeks to get a VM up and running. But that's just an example, I think, of how those things work. But what happens then, hopefully, is that the pipelines, release pipelines, code pipelines, all of those kinds of things, they become the model and the shared artifact that the teams can collaborate on and evolve, make better. It gives you a little bit of control and visibility kind of across the entire process as you're doing it, across shared teams and shared components and different release schedules and cadences and all of those kinds of things. So that it's a very valuable kind of mechanism to kind of turn your value stream and make it kind of executable as we like to say rather. So that we spend quite a bit of time on that. And when it comes to modeling your pipelines, just as with your value stream, your pipelines ought to take a lot of things into account, right? You have to think about what are the environments that are involved, what are the organizations that are involved, what are the checkpoints that we need, gateways, if you will, that we have to pass through in order to get approvals and make it into production. What are the quality parameters that we're looking for? What are the what metrics are we looking at, and are they in the right in the right range for us to move forward? And so the more of your value stream that you can kind of capture and encode and evolve in your pipeline tool, the better, right? So as much as possible, the application modeling, environment configurations, all of the processes involved, and the tools that we use, to build, to test, to deploy, all of these things, and then hopefully automate as much of this when it comes to approvals, right? If you've decided that 80% code coverage, which would be lovely to have for most of us, I would say, if that's the limit below which we don't release code, with totally arbitrary, not necessarily the best measurement in the world to use, and so on and so forth. But if we decide that that's the case, we can encode that, make it automatic, and we don't have to have a 2-hour meeting to make a decision about whether that number is above or below 80% or whatever number we pick. Tool does it for you. If you're over, you get promoted and go into the latter stages of the pipeline. And then of course, over the years, we've kind of across the whole stack, started thinking about, everything as code. Code is code, obviously, but environments as code, networks as code, storage as code, configuration as code, all of those kinds of things, because code is a good thing. It's a very valuable way to author, not necessarily the best way, and that's why actually the screenshot here is kind of showing you the visual representation on the right side here, and then kind of the code representation on the left here in electric flow. But but the idea is very much that we can collaborate. Now we can version it in the SCM. Automation in this sense also becomes documentation, and even to some extent auditing. Because if you have your pipeline put together based on your value stream and you've encoded it and put it in, you now have essentially documentation of how you do things. And if you then show that you ran that pipeline, and that's how you built and qualified, tested, released your code, then that is the proof that you do what you document, right? So it becomes, the communication and the amount of time that you have to spend pulling together evidence for audits and those kinds of things can be dramatically reduced by using those kinds of things. And then of course everybody gets access to it in whatever way is the easiest, right? Whether it's a domain-specific language or command line interfaces or APIs or GUIs or what have you. Everybody kind of gets access to all of those things. And then just a simple example of what I mean here in a little bit more of a concrete way, right? Let's say that we're this is a container-based service perhaps that we're trying to put into production here. So we've got our, kind of our dev pipeline stage here. We do a few tasks in there. Of course, we check the code out, scan it, build it, into a Docker image. We unit test it, then we publish it to the registry. And then we go into the QA stage, and you can kind of see there's a little hand icon on the left there. There's a stage gate that we have to pass through there. Those gates can be, automated or manual. We run some security things. We, do all the, whatever we decide that we need to do in QA. And again, I think one of the very important parts about this is that your pipeline has to be adaptable, right? You are never going to come up with a perfect pipeline on day one, and nor is everything going to stand still around you in terms of the technologies that you use, the tools you use, where you deploy, how you deploy, what your requirements are regulatory-wise. All of those kinds of things. And so in that sense, it's very important that your process evolve along with your product. And I encourage, when I talk to teams, I encourage you to think about your pipeline or your value stream as part of your product. It is one of the most important features in your product. We don't have installers anymore because we don't build desktop software as much, right? So I think of sort of the pipeline in a way as kind of replaced the installer, but in a very much cooler and more powerful way. But the idea very much being that now we have, everybody can see what it is that we do. We can see where we are in the pipeline. We can see what the results were, and maybe we don't make it out of QA because the Twistlock report found that we're using an old version of the struts library in the container, and we don't want to do that. So so that catches that kind of thing, and we kind of boot it out right away. We don't even get to staging, and so you kind of start your pipeline over once you fix that problem and keep going. But it gives everybody visibility into where we are. You don't have to walk around and ask questions. You don't have to kind of dread the office space type manager walking around with his coffee mug saying, yeah, it'd be great if we could release tomorrow. And you actually have a good answer to him at that point in terms of where you are and why, which is always helpful. And then Gene, we talked about this, the organizational structure slide. I don't know if you want to cover anything more in light of kind of the pipeline and value stream stuff that we talked about.
I think I'll have some remarks on architecture and how critical that is for performance based on the 2017 State of DevOps report. So yeah, let's keep going.
Indeed. Well, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about Tisson Matthew and the Amazon PrimeNow efforts that they went through, because I think that's
this is one of my favorite presentations at DevOps Enterprise. So for those of you who don't know, I've been studying high performing technology organizations for 19 years, and for 4 years, my area of passion has been understanding how large, complex organizations are being adopted, not at the FANGs, at the Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Googles, but instead at the large, complex organizations. These are the industry leaders across every industry vertical. because I think that's where the majority of economic value will be created. And so Electric Cloud was the founding sponsor. I'm so grateful for the collaboration over the, can you believe it, 5 years? Is that right? 5 years? 5 years that we've been doing this? 14, 15, 16, 17. Yeah. But we do occasionally make room for the unicorns. We've had Mike Bland share the story about how they created the automated testing culture at Google. That started all the way back in 2005. We heard from Microsoft about how they're moving to a one engineering system, and this spans 65,000 engineers. And one of the stories that I heard that I felt was so relevant to this audience was the making of Amazon PrimeNow. And it sounds like such an easy thing. And so Amazon PrimeNow, of course, is you order something and it will show up at your doorstep within 15 minutes or maybe 2 hours. And of course, that sounds like something Amazon would build, but it turns out to be one of the most mammoth technical undertakings I had ever heard. So Tisson was the engineering director at Amazon. So the way Amazon is organized, they have three main functions: ordering, fulfillment, and transportation. So ordering is everything from Amazon.com to storefronts. Then once you have an order, it moves into fulfillment, which is this mammoth. In fact, this is where probably the majority of the headcount is by a factor of like 10 to 1, because all of the fulfillment centers, the people who pick and pack the boxes, and then transportation. Like once you have them in a box, how do you actually get it to the customer? And so Amazon PrimeNow essentially was this enterprise level initiative that cut across all three. That what do you do when if you click in the Amazon.com website and you purchase something, in the old days, right before PrimeNow, it might take 2 hours for a credit card to get billed, and that's when the packages actually supposed to show up at the doorstep in PrimeNow. So they had to essentially create their own ordering systems, payment systems. Fulfillment was couldn't go through the fulfillment centers. Actually would go through the fulfillment centers, but it had to be fast tracked because a lot of the service level objectives for most of the functions would take a day, right? And they would need it within minutes. So it turns out that Tisson as an engineering director within the transportation area had to cut across over 300 teams, in fact, not small teams, like 300 functions across the Amazon enterprise. And it was one of the most heroic stories just because of the level of leadership and political sophistication needed to do that, right? There was no central planning function that could make sure that Tisson got what he needed. Basically, he was having to work with 300 parochial, selfish people who only cared about their area, right, and couldn't actually really cared less about this new idea that's been kicking around. So essentially, he had to use political skill and his Jeff Bezos card. In other words, this is actually one of the most important initiatives, and they would use that to scramble the priorities. And so the reason why I share the story is that essentially I think we're moving towards this product orientation where teams are more capable of delivering value to customers themselves. But for something like Amazon PrimeNow, no one team could deliver PrimeNow. They had to cut across essentially all of Amazon. And here's an interesting case study of what is required to do that. I thought it was just a magnificent story. Just a couple of learnings for me. One is I learned why Amazon PrimeNow required a different mobile app, right? Because in the beginning, their payment flow and ordering flow was and fulfillment flow was so different that they couldn't get the changes they needed from the main flagship mobile apps. They had to build it themselves. I've always wondered that, and it suddenly becomes very obvious why they had to do that. The second thing is I think this does suggest a need. Is that Agile is really good at the team level, but what do you do for these sort of enterprise level initiatives? And I think this is the need that things like Scaled Agile framework, the LESS framework, these are what do you do when you need a scrum of scrums, to properly push down priorities and make sure that the right initiatives are being worked on. And there's some wonderful stories that he had about what do you do when you're building all these services and you are dependent upon services to be created by other teams, and just all the mocking they had to do to basically make sure that they could be productive and have assurance that they're working on things the right way. I'm not sure if you got this talk, Anders, but it was just a magnificent presentation. I would put it up there with the Google testing culture, the birth of testing culture at Google, in terms of lessons we can all learn from the FANGs.
I mean, I think that's great. I mean, obviously, they live in a world where time is more scarce than money, which allows them to do interesting things. But also, I mean, they solve some pretty hairy and gnarly problems and do it really well, and then talk about it, which is my favorite part. Is we're gonna here's an inside sight into how we did this, and that's my favorite part of well, any conference in general, but DevOps Enterprise in particular. Although I'm biased, obviously.
Awesome.
Full disclosure. So moving along, we're going to talk a little bit about pipeline metrics. How are we doing, right? I mean, visibility is stated up front. Very important that everybody has visibility into where we are, how we're doing, all of these things. The pipelines are complex, right? And you want to think about, where are we and where is this product in the pipeline? Where is that component in the pipeline? Is that release on time? How's it looking? How are the quality numbers? How are the whatever metrics it is that we choose to track these things with? Are we tracking on time and all of those things? And it's often the case, and we witnessed this in person with some of our customers, where people just kind of dread the executive management wandering the hallways and kind of asking questions that are completely rational and expected questions like, hey, are we going to ship on time? And that becomes answering that question is not always, at the tip of your fingertips, because these are complex pipelines, complex processes, multiple teams, all of these kinds of things. But if we work on integrating data tracking as part of our pipeline efforts, then it becomes a very powerful tool and a very powerful mechanism for collecting, and then obviously also kind of reflecting back out a lot of the interesting information, right? So when you're thinking about pipeline tracking, automating as much of the collection of data from the point tools as possible, and the environments and all the pipeline jobs that that run through it, whether it's a build CI type pipeline or release pipeline or what have you, but it really it really helps give you complete visibility across everything. And when you have that kind of visibility across not just say a single product, but maybe multiple products or multiple teams, you start to kind of at the high level realize where you need to put your resources, because you can see where the trouble spots are. Where do we have lots of failed deployments, or where do we have things that are slow getting out of development, or slow getting out of the testing phases, or those kinds of things. We can sort of swarm those kinds of problems and pour resources on them as appropriate. And then of course, not everybody needs to or wants to have the same view on the problem, right? Each stakeholder, whether if I'm an ops person, I'm probably going to be very kind of application and environment oriented and health and status oriented, and what are the changes coming down the pipeline for next time oriented, and I want to be able to drill down those kinds of things. Where if I'm a release manager, I'm probably much more focused entirely on the product or products that I'm responsible for, and are the environments ready downstream? Are the upstream tasks completing on time, and are we getting the right results out of them? All of those kinds of things. And the nice part about having a lot of automation in your pipeline is that data kind of gets collected automatically. You have to do a little bit of setup to make it happen, and these types of things, of course. But you don't have to walk around as some of our customers used to do for a week or two, in this case for regulatory reasons, but walk around and hey, what was all the code we checked in, and why was that change list done, and what was that for? And all of those things are just kind of collected up along as you go, and that makes that process a whole lot faster. And then you can get kind of a buzzword, but get a single pane of glass that you can kind of see everything through and get a little bit of insight into what's happening. So Gene, talk a little bit about pipelines and architecture and those kinds of things, because they're obviously very important.
Yeah, one of the things I'm most proud of is contributing to the State of DevOps report. So that was done with Puppet for since 2013. This spans 24,000 respondents. We're actually going to the 2018 study right now, and that's being done in conjunction with Google Cloud. And one of the big findings for last year is exactly what you've been alluding to, Anders, which is that architecture is one of the top predictors of performance. We found that one of the top, as measured by these characteristics, to what extent can teams make large-scale changes to their portions of the system without permission from anyone outside of that team? To what extent can they complete their work without a lot of fine-grained communication and coordination with people, again, outside their team? Can they deploy and release on demand? Can they, I love this one, can they test on demand? In other words, can they test without the use of these scarce integration test environments? And if all of those things are true, then they are able to do deployments during normal business hours. And so the reason why I think it's so interesting is that, the way I was trained in my 13 years at Tripwire from 97 to 2010 is, we always considered it safe to ignore architects, especially chief architects, because we all knew that, these are the people who lived in their ivory tower. They came out once a year, published their PowerPoint slide, and went back to their ivory tower, never to be seen again for a year. And that was just a polite, funny way of saying they don't really influence how daily work is performed. But these days, what this finding shows is that architecture has everything to do with how people do their daily work. Is it done on demand, or is it are we hamstrung by ticketing systems? In the next slide, I think it shows kind of what the value of these platforms are, whether it's a CI/CD platform, whether it's a monitoring platform, orchestration, security scans. Everything should be done on demand, self-service, not through ticketing systems and waiting 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. And it's those characteristics that allow us to get immediacy and fast feedback. And those are the conditions that allow us to get focus and flow not only just in the lean sense, but in the sort of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi sense of like, these are the conditions that allow us to have a mental state of effortless productivity and joy. So I think that is what we aspire in every part of our work. Maybe if we could go to the Dear Auditor thing real quick. There's some questions about the ticketing systems. What do you do in highly regulated environments? You can't do it there, right? Well, of course not. But what if you could? I think one of the clear pieces of evidence that the DevOps Enterprise case studies have shown, and this is now over 200 and going up almost 250 case studies by the time we leave London, is people are doing this in the most highly regulated industries, including banking, insurance, military services, intelligence agencies, large-scale Department of Defense programs for the US government, what am I missing? Manufacturing. So these are absolutely the most highly regulated industries on the planet. And yet they are deploying DevOps principles and patterns and winning in the marketplace as a result. One of my favorite projects to come out of the DevOps Enterprise community is this project called Dear Auditor. And it was by Sam Guggenheimer at Microsoft, from Topo Pal at Capital One, at in fact, two people, Jennifer, who used to be head of internal audit for technology at Capital One, so, James Wickett from Signal Sciences. I'm just going to read this because it's a love letter to the auditor. They wrote, "We realize that we have been changing things in a rapid fashion, from Agile to DevOps to containers and cloud. Yes, we've been busy, and we are having great success delivering faster than ever, with better quality and supporting the business response to competitive pressures. This isn't just icing on the cake. It is the only sustainable advantage in our industries, is the ability to meet customer demands faster, more reliably than our competitors. But with all this growth, we made a mistake. We forgot to bring you along for the ride, and that is totally our bad, but we want to make it right. And we want to make you to use some new commitments. We want to bring you along. We want to be transparent through our development process." And they go through this wonderful letter, as well as showing the control objectives about what is the evidence that we can create within the deployment pipeline and other surrounding areas to create evidence that we are doing things responsibly in an auditable way that helps us meet all the contractual obligations and regulatory requirements. And a friend of ours, he actually sent this, he's SVP of engineering for one of the people who presented at DevOps Enterprise. He sent it to his head of audit and head of security. And the result, the email that he got back was within 12 hours. And it said, "We found this letter to be so humbling. We only wish we had a love letter in return to give to you. And actually, just a little, we know who this is. It's Scott, right? So apparently, like the audit and compliance groups are writing a love letter back to DevOps in return. So anyway, it's just like, make no mistake, you can do things in a compliant way, and arguably in a way that is far more secure and far more reliable than anything we could have done in the old way. And I think this is just a remarkable evidence of how we can bring auditors along, and maybe even get a love letter in return.
And I know we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to cover a couple of more slides, and then we can do a little bit of Q&A at the end. But I wanted to cover a couple of things, and one of them is this notion of self-service, and it's actually kind of not just tangentially related to things like dearauditor.org, but this idea that most of the time what you want to do in a restaurant, if you want fast and efficient service, is order something that's on the menu. If you order something that's off the menu, or special, or have lots of changes that you want to make to it, then you're disrupting the flow of the restaurant a little bit. Now we do the same thing with self-service catalogs in here too, in the electric flow product, in terms of provide pre-approved ways of doing things, right? In other words, order off the menu. And actually, this is to kind of close the loop on my story about the pharmaceutical company that had the 6-week delay for getting a VM. Their solution to that was to build a self-service catalog. And if you did it, if you wanted an environment that was in one of the pre-existing, pre-approved ways of doing things, you literally just click a button, answer a couple of questions, and then 15 minutes later you have your environment now. So they went kind of whole hog on the self-service aspect of this. And one of the nice things about self-service is you're still in control. And so you can you have that sort of fidelity, compliance. We didn't have an architectural review of this click of the button in the self-service catalog, because before we set it up, we did the architectural review. We looked at the security. We looked at all of these things, privacy and so on. And this is the way that we do X, Y, Z at our company in terms of a best practice. If you want something that's not on the self-service catalog, then you got to have some meetings, right? Then you got to go talk to people, communicate, see if you can get it on there. But this cuts a lot of the wait states out of waiting for environments, waiting for pipelines to be set up, all of those kinds of things. So I wanted to touch on that. And just a few quick things before we transition into the Q&A here. But automate the most common stuff and sort of the most painful stuff in terms of where you're spending a lot of time. In some cases that might be provisioning and deployment. In some cases, that might be test automation. It's hard to do test automation if you can't automatically provision and deploy systems to test on. Also, getting the security community involved, right? Make sure that we are creating these environments as agreed and as specified, and in the kind of the right way from a security point of view, and being able to securely build and monitor and run those systems. And basically just be able to, everybody agrees on how this is going to work, and that's what we go after. And then this becomes kind of a service that we provide to all of our teams inside the company. And again, if you need something that's not on the menu, then there's a process for doing that. But we spend our time in that process on the new, not on revisiting all the old ways and the things that we already know how to do. And this is the 94,000th time that we've deployed JBoss, blah blah blah. Right? We spend our time on the new and interesting things. So I'm just going to go ahead and skip to let us talk a little bit about DevOps Enterprise London. Gene, you're in charge of this. Well, I know you're going to say you're not, but spiritually you're in charge of this.
Yeah. Oh, well, certainly in charge of the programming for this, and it's one of the highest learning. I mean, it is the highest learning event for me, and because we really focus this on the obstacles and the things that the DevOps Enterprise community needs. What I find, so it's on June 25th, 26th, and I think the big thing that is, I was mentioning before the webinar, I think it's going to be the best program ever. Yeah, the best one was San Francisco 2017, and our goal was to really out-program it, and I think we've achieved it. I think 4 really noteworthy things that are happening is that I think increasingly we're finding that the constraint and obstacles for what this community is running into is leaving the technology value stream. Increasingly, it's product management, it's project management, it's the funding model, it's security. And so this year we've been actively seeking out stories where it is spanning the business technology divide. So there's a team from Verizon Enterprise where the profit and loss owner for the Verizon Enterprise market for the European market is co-presenting with the CIO of EMEA and with the DevOps leadership, showing how they were first to market in the commercial space for this incredible offering that's focused on stores needing Wi-Fi, and they instead of waiting 6 weeks to get provisioned out of line, they'll use existing mall Wi-Fi if necessary to slowly get them service, right, while they're building up the services. So it's just they're first to market, and to hear the business brag about this is just awesome. The Nike team is going to be the CFO of Nike EMEA, as well as the technology leader for direct-to-consumer for the European market. So CFO is not the back office finance, it is really about the profit and loss owner. Capital One, it's Amy Bechtel, part of the DevOps team, and John Schmidt, the Director of Product Management for Capital One, describing the mutually dependent relationship between these two functions and key banks. So there's just some incredible stories that we've never been able to get before, and we have 4 of them. So I'm super excited, and I'm looking forward to seeing you, Anders, and Sam and Alan there in 4 weeks.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. And if those 2 days don't satisfy you enough, then actually the day after, we're gonna run a couple of workshops. One with John Willis on DevSecOps, and another one called From New Learner to Executive Leader with Gary Groover and Helen Beals. So if you're not all DevOpsed out from those 2 days, come join us for those. We'll also do those after the DOES US conference in Vegas later in the year. So. I'm just going to leave this slide up and then let Alan do a little bit of Q&A in the few minutes that we have left here. Alan.
Great. Anders, Gene, thanks so much. That was a great webinar. I wish we had 2 hours for these webinars, though. But let me not talk too much, get right to questions. Dan asked, one of the advantages of microservice-based architectures often mentioned is the loosening of dependencies and allowing independent per service development processes. However, isn't that going against the shared value delivery flow value stream goal at the system level by encouraging almost per services siloing? A little bit of a wordy question, but really going to, microservices as part of DevOps. Anders, Gene, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just kind of give you my quick thought on that. I think the thing, really a lot of the value here is really honestly in kind of divide and conquer in some ways, right? These are very complex distributed systems, and when we try to build them monolithically, it's an all or nothing thing. And so if you go back and reread the Mythical Man Month and think about Conway's Law in terms of communication structures ending up in the architectures of our products. By having separate teams that are very specifically in charge of, essentially an API, because if you're doing microservices, hopefully you've got APIs wrapped around these services, you're actually making it easier to communicate, right? Because here's our API, this is what we provide, this is what we do, but we're gonna decide how we're gonna build it. We're not gonna need to talk to 42 different teams to decide how to build the microservice number 40, 43, or 44. So it really is in service of get stuff done much more quickly than when it's one big integrated thing where everybody has to use the same platform, everybody has to use the same tooling, and so on. Gene, you probably have some thoughts on that too.
No, I think, yeah.
You know what, Gene,
I think you're right on.
Gene, if you don't mind, I think that was a great answer. Let me grab one more question in here, and I'm going to throw it at you. And I know you're going to knock this one out of the park. For Adam S., can you explain how highly regulated industries can successfully implement DevOps while still maintaining sufficient industry compliance and measures through ticketing systems?
Yeah, I would go to the talks by Capital One at the DevOps Enterprise Summit by Topapal, and he actually describes the incredible control environment they built and they call it the top 10 controls, which is actually 16 controls. It's 10 in hexadecimal, which I thought was very funny. But and it really does show how you get assurance less through the ticketing system and more through automated controls within the deployment pipeline, and then tie it to the ticketing system. And he talks in excruciatingly wonderful detail about how they do that in a way that is I think your question deserves.
Excellent. Guys, unfortunately, that brings us right to the top of the hour, and we don't like to run over on these things. We have many more questions. Anders, if it's all right, we're going to get them over to you, and if maybe we can send out written answers to the many great questions. But Gene, Anders, thank you so much for appearing today on our webinar, Bridging the Gap, Scaling DevOps Across the Org. For anyone who isn't already registered, who can get to London at the end of June, highly, highly recommend DevOps Enterprise Summit. If you're US based, there is a Vegas, the Vegas Roadshow, the Vegas version of the show this year. It's been in San Francisco in past years. We'll be in Las Vegas in October. As Anders mentioned, also there's some great workshops after DOES this year. Can't emphasize, I think they're both great. You should check that out. Also, a real quick plug, my friend John Willis is doing DevSecOps Days right after DOES London this year. That's June 28th in London as well. If DevSecOps is your thing, I recommend that. Gentlemen, thank you so much for a great webinar. Thanks very much to our friends at Electric Cloud, who just seem to always be in the mix anytime there's some good DevOps learning going on. So thanks to Electric Cloud. And thank you all for listening in today, or if you're listening to this on YouTube, thank you for listening. This is Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you soon on another DevOps.com webinar.